and they want to get Trump, and they're making up new rules to get him. And the Supreme Court, thankfully, isn't having it. So next up is, I guess, maybe a good news story. And we need all the good news we can get from Washington, D.C., and that was a Supreme Court argument this week over presidential immunity. Now, for the first time in the history of America, Joe Biden's Justice Department has discovered the ability to prosecute presidents for official acts while in office after they leave office. I don't know why there's a distinction when they're in office versus when they leave office, but that's the distinction they're pretending to make. And they've used that to go after Trump and try to prosecute him for things he did as President of the United States of America, by their own admission. So this isn't a dispute that it wasn't really presidential, it was all personal. No, they admit it was presidential. And they've tried to go to the Supreme Court and make that point. And, you know, my view generally here, just to kind of give you by way of background, the structure of our, people say the president isn't above the law. Of course he's not above the law. But what the left doesn't tell you is what is the law. And the law that governs the operations of the presidency and any immunity he might have flows from the United States Constitution, which in our nation is the supreme law of the land. And the structure of our government makes the president the sole, the sole power on the executive branch in terms of all the executive authority resides in his person. And as a result, the exercise of that executive authority can only be limited through specific constitutional measures that reflect those authorities and the separation of powers. So Congress can't mess with the president's powers that are granted to him by the Constitution. The judiciary can't mess with his powers and police his powers as granted by the Constitution. And it doesn't mean he's a dictator. It just means that they can't come in and say, we're going to start arresting presidents because we don't like his policies. And we're going to gin up violations of law related to policy disputes. Or in the case of Trump, we don't like Trump for disputing the election and exercising his prerogatives as president to pursue the enforcement of federal election law with his Justice Department, and his White House staff. And people say, well, he was running, he wanted to win again. Well, of course, but that's true for every president seeking re-election. Do you think Joe Biden I mean, he's had, like, for instance, a series of outrageous, really communistic regulations in the last few weeks. And all observers are highlighting the election year impact of them and why he's doing it. And because there is an election year impact, does that mean if they're illegal or found unconstitutional, he should go to jail because he's got this personal interest in doing it? Of course not. So kind of that shows you the, I wouldn't say complexity, but it makes one think differently about the issue than has it's been explained by the what I call the Borg media. Now, those of you who don't watch Star Trek, the Borg was an alien race in Star Trek that all thought as one. That's why I keep on calling the left Borg. They all think as one when it comes to these issues. So you don't really get a full picture unless you're watching certain media groups or little old me on Judicial Watch. And, my evaluation initially of the Supreme Court argument was as follows. I think I posted, that it's going to be good. Based on the oral arguments, it looks like a strong Supreme Court majority agrees with Trump and is set to vindicate the U.S. Constitution and effectively end the sham criminal cases against Trump by Biden regime and allied Democratic politicians in Georgia. So what's interesting about this case is that if the immunity is recognized, that he can't be prosecuted for official acts as president, then you're not only going to see essentially the January 6th prosecution, where they're trying to put him in jail for disputing Biden's election as president of the United States, that be destroyed. I think the state law claims will be destroyed in Fulton County or thrown out or found wanting. And similarly, you have this fight over presidential records in Florida, where they're trying to put him in jail over a records dispute that they manufactured in a setup to try to put him in jail. And the heart of that dispute is whether records were designated or, what he took, could he take with him when he left the White House? Well, guess what position he held when he left the White House and took those records? He was president. It was an official act, right? So that case may get thrown out as well if the Supreme Court rules as it is expected to based on the oral arguments. And I suspect even that you may even get a Democrat or a leftist judge or two on the Supreme Court, a leftist justice, sign on in part to this theory or this vindication, as I say, of our constitutional structure, the separation of powers that protect the president. And we have a few clips from some of the argument the other day. We're going to post the full argument later. But you can listen with me here now. Let's go with that first clip.
What is plausible about the president assisting in creating a fraudulent slate of electoral candidates? Assuming you accept the facts of the complaint on their face, is that plausible that would be within his right to do?
Absolutely, Your Honor. We have the historical precedent we cited in the lower courts of President Grant sending federal troops to Louisiana and Mississippi in 1876 to make sure that the Republican electors got certified in those two cases, which delivered the election to Rutherford B. Hayes. The notion that it's completely implausible, I think, just can't be supported based on the face of this indictment or even
knowing that the slate is fake. Knowing that the slate is fake, that they weren't actually elected, that they weren't certified by the state. He knows all those things.
The indictment itself alleges, I dispute that characterization. The indictment affixes the word label to the so-called fraudulent electors. It affixes the word fraudulent, but that's a complete mischaracterization. On the face of the indictment, it appears that there was no deceit about who had emerged from the relevant state conventions, and this was being done as an alternative basis.
Well, that was leftist Justice Sotomayor, who was making these false allegations that there were fake electors and Trump knew. What the fight was about was having an alternative slate of electors available in states where he was disputing the election, which is, of course, what Democrats did in Hawaii in 1960. Nothing unusual about it at all. And advocating for that legal position as president of the United States is, as his lawyer for the president there, is presidential. I mean, the left likes to believe, and what I thought was interesting, and I highlighted this in a tweet, that, and they kind of admitted this in the case, it's all about getting Trump. It's all about getting Trump. Let's go to this tweet I had about the Biden DOJ lawyer, who was the solicitor representing the Jack Smith and the Biden regime. And he admitted to the Supreme Court that their witch hunt is all about, now did he say it was a witch hunt? Did he admit it the way I'm discussing that he admitted? No, but this is what, in effect, he admitted, that it's all about getting Trump. And he suggested that no president has previously committed a prosecutable crime in office. That's why no previous president has been convicted or prosecuted. Only Trump. And then afterwards, they're like, well, what about in the future? Oh, no, that will never happen. That will never happen. The Justice Department will advise presidents. An attorney general will just tell a president you can't do something. And if they have the blessing one way or another, that's enough to protect a president from being prosecuted. I mean, back with Obama, I mean, I think we had this issue of Obama. How does Obama get away with it? Biden regime in the Supreme Court today. Obama assassination of an American is perfectly legal and could never be prosecuted, but Trump disputing an election is obviously illegal and must be prosecuted. And I did a watch video for Instagram listening to the president's lawyer make that point.
The implications of the court's decision here extend far beyond the facts of this case. Could President George W. Bush have been sent to prison for obstructing an official proceeding or allegedly lying to Congress to induce war in Iraq? Could President Obama be charged with murder for killing U.S. citizens abroad by drone strike? Could President Biden someday be charged with unlawfully inducing immigrants to enter the country illegally for his border policies? The answer to all these questions is no. Prosecuting the president for his official acts is an innovation with no foothold in history or tradition and incompatible with our constitutional structure.
Yeah, one of the justices followed up with this. I don't know if it was earlier or later in the discussion here. Let's run that video of the Supreme Court justice talking about this drone strike issue with Obama.
How about President Obama's drone strikes?
So the Office of Legal
Kavanaugh.
Counsel looked at this very carefully and determined that, number one, the federal murder statute does apply to the executive branch. The president wasn't personally carrying out the strike, but the aiding and abetting laws are broad. And it determined that a public authority exception that's built into statutes and that applied particularly to the murder statute because it talks about unlawful killing did not apply to the drone strike. So this is actually the way that the system should function. The Department of Justice takes criminal law very seriously. It runs it through the analysis very carefully with established principles. It documents them, it explains them, and then the president can go forward in accordance with it. And there is no risk of prosecution for that course of activity.
Well, don't you love the insane circular logic? The Justice Department blessed the drone strike, so therefore no president could be prosecuted, nor is Obama could possibly be prosecuted. I mean, the logic or the illogic is inescapable. I mean, I think Chief Justice Roberts really slammed the appellate court full of recent Democrat appointees, Obama, Biden, I think, who just pretended there was no immunity for anything a president did it officially, it looks like. And Roberts said, well, this is crazy town. He didn't say crazy town. I'd say crazy town. He said that, the lower court said that a president can be prosecuted because the Justice Department is prosecuting him. That's the sophistication of the argument. And of course, Roberts rejects that. And there was a further discussion on a related issue a little bit later. Let's run that video.
Did I understand you to say, well, if he makes a mistake, he makes a mistake. He's subject to the criminal laws just like anybody else? You don't think he's in a peculiarly precarious position?
He's in a special position for a number of reasons. One is that he has access to legal advice about everything that he does. He's under a constitutional obligation he's supposed to be faithful to the laws of the United States and the Constitution of the United States. And making a mistake is not what lands you in a criminal prosecution. There's been some talk about the statutes that are issued in this case. I think they are fairly described as malum in se statutes, engaging in conspiracies to defraud the United States with respect to one of the most important functions, namely the certification of the next president.
Well, I don't want to dispute that particular application of 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, to the particular facts here. But would you not agree that that is a peculiarly open-ended statutory prohibition, in that fraud under that provision, unlike under most other fraud provisions, doesn't require any impairment of a property interest?
It's designed to protect the functions of the United States government, and it's difficult to think of a more critical function than the certification of who won the election.
Yeah, I'm not, as I said, I'm not discussing the particular facts of this case, but it applies to any fraud that interferes seriously with any government operation, right?
So what the government needs to show is an intent to impede, interfere, or defeat a lawful government function by deception, and it has to be done with scienter. These are not the kinds of activities that I think any of us would think a president needs to engage in order to fulfill his Article 2 duties, and particularly in a case like this.
Well, you notice that Justice Alito, who was questioning Dravin, the Justice Department lawyer, wasn't biting. And Dravin's argument, the lawyer's argument was, but Trump, but Trump, but Trump, but Trump. And that what Trump is alleged to have done, means that all the normal constitutional provisions related to managing a president and his authorities under the Constitution should be thrown out. Why is murdering an American citizen any less important than the transition of power? Which is what Obama did. He killed an American citizen without due process because he was a terrorist abroad. Or spending billions of dollars that he's not authorized to spend, like Biden has repeatedly done. The Supreme Court has found him to have done. Isn't that important too? It depends on whose ox is being gored, right? And they want to get Trump, and they're making up new rules to get him. And the Supreme Court, thankfully, isn't having it. And hopefully the genius of our Constitution, which allows the Supreme Court to make decisions related to the constitutionality of such activities, may protect Biden protect Trump to a certain extent, and yes, protect Biden in the long run. What's to stop Biden from being prosecuted now? Why can't a state attorney general seek to prosecute Biden? I don't see, under their theory of the case or the law, how the Biden DOJ could even object to that. Well, being lawyers, they'll pretend there's all sorts of reasons to object to it, and it's different. It's always different when it comes to Trump. So I think Trump's going to win here by all accounts, if you're counting votes based on the oral argument. And as I said earlier, I think there'll even be a few, maybe even a leftist justice or two signs on to part of the case or part of the opinion protecting the president's prerogatives here. Should these lawyers and the Biden people be prosecuted for pursuing these cases against Trump? Well, by their logic, yes. They're losing the case. Trump lost these election cases. That's why they had no merit, and that's why he should be prosecuted. That's literally their argument. And, we hear them trying to defend why only Trump should be prosecuted and will be prosecuted. Last week we heard at the Supreme Court them saying how they, we would only prosecute January 6ers, but we'll never prosecute leftists. And this is why we never have and probably never will for similar conduct. I mean, the left wants to use the powers of government to reward their friends and punish their enemies. It's the Obama way, and they're doing it and admitting to it effectively before the Supreme Court time and time again. And that's why these oral arguments are important. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.